Okay, this video is going to be a little different because I'm going to do a video on an advertisement that appeared in the comic. And this video is on popular memes of the 1970s. So here's an advertisement that appeared in the 1972 Turok. And I would show you the cover of it, but the copy I have happens not to have a cover. And this is an ad for Roach iron-on transfers. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Roach in a moment. These were just designs printed with special ink on a special type of paper, and all you do is place it onto a light colored t-shirt, and preferably, and heat an iron to the right setting and just iron it on right onto the t-shirt. Then you have your own custom printed t-shirt. Now it might be argued that these are not really memes because memes are an internet phenomena, and the word was coined after the advent of the internet by Richard Dawkins. But the reality is that a word can apply to things that existed even before the word existed, you know. Like the word rock. Rocks existed long before the word rock was coined. So let's explore these memes that were popular back in 1972. And let's go back into a little bit of the backstory behind each one of them and see just what was on young people's minds back in the year 1972, or basically in the early 1970s. Now, the first meme is simply the peace sign with an American flag over it. The peace sign was very popular in the 1960s and early 70s because of the Vietnam War. And you're familiar with the peace sign from our modern day emoticon. And the second meme is something you're probably also familiar with. It's Sweet Pea. I don't know if that's Popeye's son or nephew or who it is, but that's Sweet Pea from the Popeye cartoons. And now we come to Felix the Cat. You know Felix the Cat. Felix the Cat, the wonderful, wonderful cat. Okay, you may not know the song, but you know the character. And all this brings me to the book Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, who passed away a few years ago. And this was written in 1970, so a couple years before this ad we're talking about. And he was making the prediction, one of the many predictions he made in this book was that people's memories of pop culture icons were going to become shorter and shorter because technology and society was going to speed up so much, and we're going to be bombarded with so many new pop culture characters that we just would not remember the old ones for very long. And he used the example of Twiggy, who was a supermodel back in the 1960s, who most people have never heard of today. Even at the time, she kind of fell out of fame very quickly, and so he thought that would happen in the future as well. So we're kind of seeing just how right or how wrong he was with this video. So the next t-shirt is called "Are You Experienced?" And I don't know how commonly used this phrase is nowadays, but that was apparently pretty popular back then. And the reason for it was because of the album by Jimi Hendrix that came out around that time of the same name, either early 70s or late 60s. And it's a drug reference. It's like, a coy drug and possibly a sexual reference. There's the album right there, Are You Experienced? And you can see the similarity to the t-shirt art in some of these images, especially this one. And you're saying, how could they put a coy drug reference in a comic book? Well, they were subtle about it. And also it could have more than one meaning, are you experienced? You could be experiencing anything. So that's how they got past the censors. And the next logo we come to is for Roach Studios. Now this was an actual movie studio back in the silent movie days. In the 1920s and even earlier. It was founded in 1914 as a comedy studio. And they were in the old silent film black and white days, making movies or making short films. And so it went through various, permutations as time went on. It had certain bankruptcies. It made movies, had bankruptcies. The lot was taken down, and it was sold to various different companies. It was broken up. and it had a long history, and then the founder died and it went into the hands of a son. But it broke up into different segments or different divisions, and one of them was simply selling these T-shirts. And Roach Studios is still around, and they're still selling T-shirts. At least the T-shirt division of it is still around. You can still order a T-shirt from them to this very day, in fact. Okay, so the next T-shirt transfer is olive oil. Yeah, you know olive oil, Popeye's girlfriend. Yeah, that's another one you know. Now the next T-shirt transfer is Flash Gordon. There's another character you probably know, from the movies and the comic strips. Yeah, Flash Gordon. Now the next one appears to be just a simple, harmless little butterfly. Now I don't know what the significance of that is. Maybe it's just a butterfly. Maybe it represents peace, love, and harmony, or maybe it's some kind of drug, psychedelic drug reference. I don't know. But a lot of these icons had a double meaning because that's how they got past the censors. They meant more than one thing. Now the next one is pretty obvious. Class of 72. That's pretty self-explanatory. Those students who were graduating from high school back in 1972 would want to wear the class of 72 on their t-shirt. Now the next one is just the peace sign. Just a hand making the peace sign, like the first one we looked at. And the one following that is love, peace, and happiness. Here's a similar one that says peace, love, and music. Now you may notice that there's a lot of emphasis around peace in those days. This is not just because people like to be peaceful. You have to remember that the Vietnam War was raging at that time, and the Vietnam War was not like the war with Ukraine, because young Americans were actually being drafted. The draft was still in effect back in those days. So there was a very strong peace movement and peace marches going on around that time. Now the next ones are Spider-Man, Captain America, and the Hulk. Yeah, you know those guys. Marvel comics were popular back then too. Now the next one is apparently a dartboard with the word student over it. And I guess the meaning of that one is that as a student you feel that you're the target of the darts and the attacks and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune of everyone else. Now the next one is just the classic smiley face. Now I don't know what the origin of this is. It goes way back, and they're different. It's complicated. There are different people who claim to have been the first ones who just thought of the idea of just a simple smiley face. But the real smiley face icon as we know it was when somebody decided to just put the simple smiley face and make a yellow background for it. And of course the most famous implementation of this in our day is the smiley emoticon. And in fact I think the yellow color of the original smiley face is the reason why pretty much all the emoticons, all the face emoticons started off as yellow, because first of all it was inspired by the smiley face. They were all inspired by that. And secondly, it was a neutral color. It could represent anyone. It didn't bring race into it. It was just intended to be a neutral symbol that represented everyone with no racial conflict. And of course Apple had to come along and change all of that and make these different racial groups. And now they racialized something that was intended from the beginning not to be racial. Now the next one, in case you can't read it, is simply "The devil made me do it." Now this was a very popular catchphrase of that era, and it was a comedy phrase that people used all the time, or an excuse for whatever they did. And this was popularized by the comedian named Flip Wilson. Now this is a guy who really did fade into obscurity. He was very famous at the time, and he had a TV show for a short while, and he was quite popular. And then he just seemed to fade into obscurity, and I don't know what happened. Nowadays, I don't think most people have heard of him. Next, we come to Popeye. Yeah, Popeye. We all know Popeye. Next is an Easy Rider iron-on. I think that was included because the term was popularized by the 1969 film starring Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper, and Jack Nicholson. And besides, motorcycles are cool. Next we come to Snuffy Smith. That's probably not as familiar today as Popeye is, but Snuffy Smith was kind of a spin-off from the comic strip, the old comic strip, Barney Google. First it started off as, I think, Barney Google, and then it became Barney Google and Snuffy Smith by the 1970s. And by the 1970s, Snuffy Smith had pretty much taken over the strip, but he was like the hillbilly character, maybe the cousin of Barney Google. Next, we come to the Budweiser logo. Yep, the good old Budweiser logo, which I think is probably pretty familiar to many of the viewers of this video. Next, we come to the Black Power fist. This was a popular symbol and meme and slogan and concept back in the 1970s. Kind of the equivalent of Black Lives Matter or BLM today. But Wikipedia is actually honest about the Black Power fist when they say that it is a logo generally associated with black nationalism, black pride, solidarity, and socialism. Its most widely known usage is by the Black Panther Party, a black Marxist group in the 1960s. But I actually think that Black Power is a little more honest than the slogan Black Lives Matter, because no one ever said that black lives don't matter, but the phrase is trying to insinuate that white people don't think that black lives matter, or they're trying to say that black lives don't matter, which is ridiculous, of course. And contrary to Black Power, the slogan is actually disempowering because it's claiming that black on black crime or violence is actually the fault of white people and is therefore out of the hands of black people. There's nothing black people can do about it until white people stop being so racist. So it's really a way of taking power out of the hands of black people and putting it in the hands of some nebulous force that they don't control. Next we come to a American eagle on top of a shield with the American flag on it. So it's a patriotic symbol. I can't quite make out what it says, America something. I'm not totally familiar with this, but it seems like people were more patriotic. Americans were more patriotic back in the 1970s. And just, several of the memes here that on this page are patriotic memes. And of course the media nowadays is starting to try to imply that if you're patriotic, that means you're more far right, or extremist. They're trying to, or even racist. They're starting off subtly, which is the way the media always starts off, and then they become more and more brazen as time goes on. It's like they know that if you tell a lie often enough, people will start to believe it. Now we come to the ecology flag. A green American flag with the ecology logo over it. And ecology was the old word for environmentalism, and for some reason it faded out of fashion. But some people say that environmentalism is actually a more accurate word than ecology, because ecology is supposed to mean the whole interaction of environmental forces of nature with each other, while environmentalism is about humans protecting the environment. But ecology used to mean what environmentalism means today, but for some reason it kind of fell out of fashion. Next is just the American flag, again patriotic. Next is the American flag with the peace logo over it. More on the peace logo in a little bit. Next is the Superman emblem. Yeah, we all know Superman. Superman was just as popular then as he is today. Next is another patriotic emblem, the USA with the colors of the American flag over it. Now the next iron-on is not too clear, but it appears to be a surfer emblem, and it's part of the old California surfer culture. Now this was a culture that was especially popular in the 1960s. In fact, it spawned a whole genre of surfer movies back then. And the next t-shirt is for Boone's Farm Apple Wine. I guess this was a particularly popular brand of wine back in the 1970s. And the fact that this is a t-shirt that is part of an ad in a comic book that was primarily aimed at those who couldn't even drink wine at that time, is the irony of that is not lost on me. The next t-shirt is for Keep On Truckin'. That was a meme that was created by the so-called underground cartoonist Robert Crumb, and it featured these guys in rather exaggerated perspective, putting one foot in front of the other, just trucking along, I guess. And so this is a very popular slogan back in the 1970s. Now the next symbol is called the peace symbol. Ah, the peace symbol. There are so many things we can say about that, so many stories floating around about how it was developed, what are the origins of it. It's another symbol that was particularly popular in the 1970s, somewhat faded out of popularity since then, but you can still sometimes see it on bumper stickers, the backs of vans, and still sometimes probably t-shirts, but not too often. But remember, again, this is while the Vietnam War was still raging. Now, what are the origins of the peace symbol? Oh boy, we could spend a whole video on that. Now, the official explanation is that the creator of the symbol simply combined the semaphore signals, the two semaphore signals for nuclear disarmament, one which was two lines going down diagonally and another line going up for disarmament, and just combined them together and got the idea for peace. But as far as I know, the originator of this symbol was never in the Navy, and I believe semaphore is or was primarily used in the Navy. Now, the other explanation is somewhat more sinister. The other explanation is that this is the Christian cross that was turned upside down, and this is supposedly part of a satanic symbol. It's turned upside down, and the arms of the cross are broken downwards in part of the satanic ritual. And so they just took that upside down broken cross symbol and put it inside a circle, and that became the peace symbol. So it's like a double meaning. It's got one of these. It supposedly means one thing, but in reality it means something very different. It's kind of like laughing up their sleeve at what they're really getting away with. And I had heard of this alternative theory a long time ago. So for this video, I decided to look it up, and I found this website called strangerthanfiction.com. And so I haven't read the whole article about it, but it gets really deep into it, and you can get as deep down the rabbit hole as you like in looking into the origins of these various things. But according to the website, the upside down crucifixion was a type of actual type of crucifixion that was used many times back in antiquity. So which explanation of the peace symbol is true? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. To me, the story of the semaphore, the two semaphore signals combined together, it sounds a little, I don't know, shaky to me. It sounds like a cover story, something somebody made up after the fact. But again, I'll leave it up to you to make the final decision on that. Now, the next t-shirt is of good old W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields, the comedian from black and white movie fame. That t-shirt is for W.C. Fields. The next iron-on is the Confederate flag. Ah, yes, the Confederate flag, the good old Confederate flag. Again, so much could be said about this. This is a part of American history. This is a part of our military history. This is a part of the history of the country. It was not seen for decades and decades. A century after the Civil War, more than a century, it was not seen as there being anything wrong about this. This is simply part of the history, like learning about the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812 or any other war that took place in the past. It's simply a historical symbol. And it was a prominent feature in the car in the Dukes of Hazzard, for example. But, you know, the provocateurs and the dividers and those who want to rile up people and divide the country, they had to turn it into this horrible thing that we should be ashamed of, deeply ashamed of forever, even though hundreds of thousands of people were killed already and atoned for any past sins of this country in that terrible war. But we're only allowed to think of it in a certain way nowadays. Now the next patch is simply the word love with the peace symbol. And again, you know, this was during the Vietnam War, and it had this is another one that had kind of a double meaning, you know, because this was during the sexual revolution, and there was a slogan, "Make love, not war." So it was kind of, you know, kind of had double meaning. It was about anti-war, but it was also about something else too. The next patch is for Woodstock, and this is another one that has a double meaning, because this was a music festival that took place in the late 1960s, but it was known as a music festival, but it was also widely known for its being kind of a sexual kind of a festival as well, and also a drug festival, you know, and so it had a double meaning, another one that had kind of a double meaning, if not a triple meaning. The next one is simply the peace symbol over the American flag. Now we come to Felix the Cat again. Good old Felix the Cat. Now the next one, I guess, is President Nixon, who was president at that time. Now I'm a little surprised to see this one, but I guess he had his fans at that time. But I remember that Nixon was the most reviled, the most hated, the most despised, the most ridiculed public figure or president in all of history at that time. I mean, he was ridiculed, he was mocked on late night talk shows, he was ridiculed in magazines, he was ridiculed in newspapers, in editorial cartoons, but he was the most reviled and despised president in all of history, until Trump came along, of course. And of course, a lot of this was due to Watergate, which was supposed to be the most terrible crime ever committed by a president in all of history. And so he was Now, I'm not one who says that everything Nixon did was wonderful. In fact, he did made some pretty bad mistakes when he was in office. Now, here's an issue of the Chicago Sun-Times I have after Nixon resigned. But he resigned because he knew that Congress had the goods on him. If he didn't voluntarily quit, he was impeached. He would be ousted from office anyway, unlike with Trump, which they actually had nothing on him at all. But many people at the time said that Nixon had done nothing, you know, nothing worse than what many other presidents had done down through history. But Nixon's mistake was that he had recorded everything that went on in the Oval Office on tape for reference or historical purposes or whatever, I guess. And Congress knew he had all these tapes, and they demanded that they be released, which he had to do, of course. Here's another historical newspaper I have from the Chicago Tribune before Nixon resigned, in which it reprinted 44 pages of complete Nixon page tape transcripts. And back then, newspapers were bigger, larger paper size even than they are today. And they were really big back then. And it devoted 44 pages of transcripts, which of course, I have never bothered to read these, but I suppose you could see them online. So as I page through this, I'll tell you about the whole Watergate fiasco in case you don't know what it was. But this whole thing started when some Republican operatives broke into the Democratic National Headquarters, which happened to be located in the Watergate Hotel. And so that's how the whole scandal got its name. And it turns out that Nixon knew about this. He knew about the break-in. He did not order the break-in. He did not call for it. He did not order it, as from my understanding at all. But he did know about it. And so rather than exposing and bringing these perpetrators to justice, he decided just to stay quiet about it. So that was called the big cover-up. And so that was the whole thing. Nixon knew about this break-in, and he decided to stay quiet about it. And that's what the whole Watergate scandal was about. And I know it seems kind of tame today and in this day and age, but that was enough to get him ousted because he had all these tapes. They had the goods on him. But they have Hunter Biden's laptop now, and that was not only the media not run 44 pages of transcripts of Hunter Biden's laptop, which has horrible, terrible scandals in it. Many scandals, any one of which is many, many times worse than Watergate. Just horrible things, some of which are not even printable. And many of these things implicate Joe Biden too. Both as president and as vice president. I mean, if this was just about Hunter Biden, it would be one thing, but old Joe is directly implicated in a lot of these scandals, a series of kickbacks and collusion. And so it's not just about Hunter Biden. And the media not only covered it up today, but they generally are kind of, they didn't report on it before the election, and they're kind of, being quiet about it today. So it just goes to show the difference in the way conservatives are treated and the way the Democrats are treated. The good news is that the incredible double standard is getting harder and harder for the establishment to cover up, and more Americans are becoming aware of it because it's so blatant and in your face now. Now the next one is Bluto, good old Bluto, Popeye's friend, or should I say arch enemy. And some people, by the way, think it's pronounced Bruto. It's actually not Bruto, it's Bluto. Now the last one is one I'm a little surprised about. It appears to be a white power fist, and I didn't even know they had a white power fist because, white people are not supposed to have power. They're not supposed to have any kind of racial consciousness at all. They're not supposed to have any empowerment movement or any kind of empowerment whatsoever. They're supposed to sink their heads in shame forever and perpetually over supposed sins of the past. Nowadays, even saying it's okay to be white is a horrible race crime, and it's a sign of white supremacy, and it's a terrible thing, and it must be stamped out. So you can't even think it's okay, much less to have power to be a white person. So now we come back to Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, in which he said, written back in 1970, in which he said that the near future would be marked by constantly changing cultural landscape, in which there were, really no cultural icons had any persistence, and they would be forgotten very quickly. So he was obviously wrong about that. So the question is, why was he so wrong when he thought that things are going to change so rapidly in the future? Well, I think the reason for that, my theory, is because of television. Television is a great cultural glue or enforcer or whatever you want to call it, and so it, the same popular themes like Popeye or Superman or whatever are constantly rehashed, recycled in the movies too, but especially on television, and used over and over again. Old films can be reprinted, replayed, rebroadcast over and over again. And also a lot of parents who have a nostalgic feeling about their own childhood and the cultural icons of their childhood, they introduce them to their own children because this is a way of reliving their nostalgia through their own kids. So they introduce their favorite cultural icons to their kids, and so the whole cycle is repeated. So this is one of many things, obviously, that Alvin Toffler was wrong about. So that's it. So if you like this video, I hope you'll click the like button. I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll subscribe. And if this video is popular, I'll probably do some more along these same lines of popular memes of the 1970s and maybe even earlier. And I might even do some videos on some of the gadgets and gimcracks that were advertised in the back of comic books over the past many years, some of which I actually have in my own collection. So thanks for watching, and talk to you later.